Hi guys, this is going to be your last week of videos for me. This is going to be Unit 6, Week 1 in your reading textbook. And this week we're going to be talking about a myth. And on our small reading book on page 402, we have the title, Plant Myths. And it asks us a question, as it normally does. Our essential question is, what do myths help us understand? So this week we're going to be talking about what a myth is, and we're going to be understanding why a myth helps us. And so as we read, we're going to be looking at clues. I'm going to go ahead and read this page on page 403, and then we'll fill in the diagram behind me to find out about plant myths. Do you know the myth about bluebells? It's thought that if you disturb them, something bad will happen. Some myths were created to help us understand how plants develop. Other myths help us understand the stages of a plant's life. Here are a few myths about plants. Finding a four-leaf clover is lucky. When a dandelion dies, you will get a wish when you blow away the seeds. I'm sure you've heard of those last two myths before. Anybody ever searched for a four-leaf clover outside? I'm sure you have. I did that when I was a kid. You know, a lot of people say that if you find a four-leaf clover, that it brings good luck. Does it really bring good luck? Well, that's the myth. A myth is something that's not true. It's a made-up story, and it explains why things are the way they are or how something came to be. And usually at the end of a myth, there's a lesson to be learned or a message. Sometimes people call it the moral of the story. And so usually you can learn something from a myth. Most of the time, a myth is a story that has talking animals as characters. A lot of times the animals will take on human characteristics. They might act like a human where they wear clothes, or they might do the things that a human does, like work in a garden or run a race, and they talk to each other. So those are all examples of different things that you might find in a myth. This week we're going to be looking at lots of different myths, and we're going to be talking about the lesson to be learned in each one. I want to go back to this one and talk about some of these plant myths. One of them we said was that a four-leaf clover, if you find it, that's lucky. So we're going to record that on our board. So if you find a four-leaf clover, that's lucky. I've got that. That's a plant myth. What was one of the other myths that you remember me reading about? That's right, the dandelion. If you don't know what a dandelion is, it's those yellow flowers that pop up on the ground. And when the flower starts to die, it leaves the white, puffy, ball-looking thing, and it looks kind of like a cotton ball. And when you pick it and you blow it, the seeds spread out everywhere. That is a myth that if you make a wish, when you blow out the seeds, your wish will come true. I'm sure you might have done that as a little bit before too, if you've ever blown out the dandelion. So we're going to put that over here. I'll just put make a wish. We'll know what that means. The other one was at the beginning of the story, and it was about the bluebell plants. Do you remember what the myth was for that one? Here's a picture of a lot of the flowers. They almost look purple because there's so many of them. And here's an example of what that bluebell flower looks like up close. A bluebell flower is said to, if you disturb it or if you mess with it, something bad will happen. So I'm going to write that one as our last example. We'll squeeze it in. So those were just a few of the examples in this little short story that we read about plant myths. And so we learned that a myth can help us understand something in the story. Usually, when an author writes a myth, there's a reason for writing that story. And so we said that a myth is a made-up story, and it explains why something happens or how something came to be. And in this story, we learned that there were 3 different kinds of plants that there are myths told about. And so the dandelion, the 4-leaf clover, and the bluebell plant all have a myth. They have a message behind them that's fun to believe or fun to participate in, but they're really not true. So this week we're going to look at another myth, and it's called Why the Fir Tree Keeps His Leaves. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Before we get started with that, let's look at the page with our vocabulary words. On page 404, you have 8 new vocabulary words that we'll be looking at in this story this week. And so I'll say the word and you repeat it after me. Are you ready? Appeared, crops, develop, edge, golden, rustled, shining, stages. Let's talk about these words for just a minute. Our first word was the word appeared. If something appears, it just shows up unexpectedly, out of nowhere. Over here we've got some plants, and it says buds appeared on the tree in early spring. That means they weren't there before, but all of a sudden they just showed up overnight. You know, I've had that happen before here at my house with plants. One day there are no flowers, and the next day it seems like it's in full bloom, so it just pops open. It's pretty neat. Our next word is the word crops. Crops are plants or fields with plants in them that farmers grow. Here's it shows you a field. It looks like corn. The farmer grows crops of corn and wheat. Our next word is the word develop. In this picture, I notice a tadpole. He still has his tail, but he is starting to develop legs. We know that the word develop means to grow. The tadpole will develop into a frog. If you develop, you grow and you change. Our next word is the word edge. We've got a ball and it's sitting on the edge of the table. Remember, the edge is the very tip or the very side of something. The ball rolled off the edge of the table. Our next word is the word golden. And I see a sunset. The golden sun shone in the blue sky. So golden is the color of something yellow or something of that shade. The sun is golden. Our next word is the word rustled. I want you to pay attention to that word because there's a letter in there that you don't hear when you say the word. When I say the word, it sounds like rustle. But there's actually a letter T in there that you may not hear. So don't forget the letter T in that word. Rustle is the way it sounds. Rustle. But we don't say it that way, right? The T is silent. I see some leaves blowing in the wind. The leaves rustled in the wind. So to rustle means to move around. Our next word is the word shining. They've got a flashlight. If something is shining, it's a light. The shining flashlight made it easier for us to read the book at night. So it could be a light or it could be anything else that's shiny. A coin could be shining in the sun if it's laying on the sidewalk. Our next word is the word stages. Egg, caterpillar, and butterfly are stages in a butterfly's life. So we see that the butterfly has changed from a caterpillar into a butterfly. Stages are the steps that something goes through as it changes. These are our words this week, and we're going to look at those again in our story today. Remember that our story is about a fir tree. And when I look at our story, at the very top of the page, it tells me that this story is a myth. Remember what we said our characteristics for a myth is. A myth is a made-up story. As I look at the pages, I can tell that this is not a true story because of the pictures. If you remember last week's story, it was a real story, and it had real information and real events in the story, and I could tell that because it had real photographs on the pages. When I look at this story, I can tell this story is not true because I see there are trees, and the trees have faces on them. And this one is making an expression. Here's another one on this side. And they could even be talking to one another. So I know real trees don't talk, so I can go ahead and predict that a myth is not a true story. Another thing, a characteristic about a myth, we said, is that a myth tries to explain how something came to be or why things are the way they are. Maybe it's a story about a zebra, and it says why the zebra has stripes. Or maybe it's about a giraffe, and it says how the giraffe got its long neck. And so in those stories, we would be learning about a funny story or a made-up story about a zebra or a giraffe. And the author would be making up a story trying to explain how the zebra got its stripes or how the giraffe got its long neck. And by the end of the story, we would learn the lesson or the moral. So in this story, our last thing that we're going to be finding at the end of the story is a lesson or a moral. And so at the end, usually the author will state what the lesson to be learned in this story is. Another example of a myth is that it has talking characters that are animals. And so we're going to look at those things today as we read this myth, and we're going to see how the fir tree keeps its leaves. Remember that a fir tree looks like a pine tree in a way. It's a little bit different, but they stay green all year long. Do all of our trees stay green all year long? No, that's right. Some of them in the fall start to change colors and they begin to lose their leaves. And that's a way that the tree saves its energy because they go through these stages or these steps as they change and they grow and they develop. When the winter starts coming along, the trees start to change colors and lose their leaves. If I look at this picture, I see these trees look like they're changing for fall. And they're probably going to lose their leaves. That's a way that a tree saves its energy for the winter, through the winter. And it kind of goes through a sleeping stage. We call it dormant. The tree doesn't die, but it goes through this stage where it's not active right then. It saves its energy, and it does that by losing its leaves. And it kind of like sleeps through the winter so that when the spring comes, it can begin to wake up and use that energy to grow new leaves and blossoms and all the things, the buds that comes out, and then it can be pretty again in the spring and the summer. Now those are only for some trees. Other trees that we have don't shed their leaves at all. They're called evergreen trees. A fir tree is a kind of evergreen tree, and even in the winter time, it's pretty and green. You might think about a Christmas tree. That looks like an evergreen tree. So we're going to learn today why a fir tree keeps his leaves. We're going to learn why he stays green all year. Are you ready? Here we go. Long ago, in ancient times, Mother Nature gave each tree a different purpose. However, she did not share her reasons with the trees. Fir tree had 3 friends, maple, oak, and elm. During the first summer, they saw bird and squirrel play in farmers' corn and tomato crops. The breeze blew and rustled their leaves. The shining sun warmed them up. Then the first fall arrived. Farmer harvested what he had grown. Maple, oak, and elm's leaves turned beautiful shades of orange, red, and yellow. The leaves shone golden as the sun. Fir tree's leaves stayed green. Look at his face. And they're so happy. I wonder what he's thinking. I wonder when he's watching his friends turn colors and he sees that he's staying green, I wonder what he's thinking. I bet he's thinking, what's wrong with me, don't you think? Why am I not like them? Fir tree complained to Mother Nature. I don't like my leaves. I want them to change colors just like my friends' leaves. Be patient, Mother Nature replied. You will learn your purpose. So Fir tree waited. The temperature dropped even more. Bird flew south and squirrel was nowhere around. Maple, oak, and elm lost their leaves, but Fir tree's green leaves remained. Soon, snow blanketed the ground. Again, Fir tree protested to Mother Nature. Why am I different? Why don't I have stages and change like my friends? I seem to be stuck in one period of life. Be patient, Mother Nature replied. Soon you will develop an understanding of your purpose. Just then, Squirrel appeared on the edge of the forest. She was cold. When she went inside the forest, she saw Maple. She asked if she could build a warm nest in his branches. Maple said he didn't have any leaves. She asked Oak, then Elm. Both said the same thing as Maple. She was still bitterly cold. Squirrel approached the fir tree. Excuse me, she said. May I build a nest in your branches? Yes, that would be nice, said the fir tree. Squirrel ran up Fir tree's branches, and she made her nest. Soon she was warm, comfortable, and asleep. Fir tree finally understood that his green leaves provided a warm shelter for animals in the winter. From that moment on, Fir tree was happy to be different. Still today, he remains proud of his evergreen leaves. I like that story. You know, sometimes we feel like we have to be like everyone else, don't we? But we have to remember that we're supposed to be different. We're all different, and that's what makes us special. A lot of times we want to fit in and we want to look or act like everyone else. And that's not what makes us who we are. We're special because we're different, and you should be proud that you're different. You know, as I think about these friends, Fir tree felt left out, didn't he? Because he kept his leaves and he was green and everyone else was changing colors and losing their leaves, and he was a little bit sad, wasn't he? He wanted to be like everyone else. But there was a reason he wasn't like everyone else. Just like there's a reason you're not like everyone else. What was one of the things that we kept hearing in the story that was repetition? Remember, repetition is when things are repeated. Do you remember anything that was said that was repeated? Right. Be patient. Mother Nature told him when he complained, she kept repeating the same phrase. Be patient. He would soon understand why he's different, but he had to be patient. At the very end of the story, it tells us the lesson. Did you hear it? I'm going to read the last paragraph again, so listen. Fir tree finally understood that his green leaves provided a warm shelter for animals in the winter. Why did he have to keep his green leaves? That's right, to provide a warm shelter for the animals in the winter. You know, the squirrel went looking for a home in each of these trees and she couldn't find one because there weren't any leaves left to make a nest. So that's why the fir tree was there, to help have a place for the animals to hide and have a warm place to stay in the winter. From that moment on, Fir Tree was happy to be different. Still today, he remains proud of his evergreen leaves. So in this myth, we tried to understand why Fir Tree kept his leaves. In the very end, it told us that his leaves were there to provide warmth for the other animals in the winter. It also told us something that we could learn from this story. You know, we're not a tree, and I don't need to worry about keeping somebody warm in the winter because we don't live outside. But is there another lesson that I could learn from this story? Think about it. What could I learn from this story? What could you learn from this story? What do you think the author wanted us to learn? That's right. We're all different. And we should be proud of who we are, just like we talked about. You know, from that moment on, Fir Tree was happy to be different. So as I look at that sentence, I'm thinking about how the Fir Tree learned that he was different, and he learned to be proud of himself, and he learned to be happy because he was different. He learned that he was special. When I think about Fir Tree, I think about me, and I think about you, and I think the author wants us to know that we are different too. But he wants us to be happy to be different. And he wants us to be proud of who we are, just like Fir Tree was proud of who he is. As I look at this story, I can understand that it's a myth because the animals were talking to each other. They had a conversation with Mother Nature. So I know this is a made-up story because of that. Another thing that tells me that this is a myth is because it explains why something happened or how something came to be. I'm learning about a fir tree and why it keeps its leaves. And the last thing that I read was that there was a moral or a lesson to be learned at the end of the story. And I can understand that it's important that we're proud of who we are. And so myths help us to understand things in a fun way. So this story, I hope you enjoyed it this week, and I hope you'll read it and do the activities on our Google Classroom page with this story this week. And this is going to be our last week of lessons. And so after you have finished with your reading books this week, you can take those by the school and drop them off. I think they will have lunches and breakfasts ready from 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock each day through the week. And so you can drop them off any day at that time and just let them know that they go to my classroom, and I'll put them back in our room for us, okay? So when you finish with your books this week, have a parent drive you by the school, and you can turn those in to the cafeteria ladies or to the ladies that are there in the office, and they'll put them in our room for us, okay? I hope you enjoy your other story this week, and it's also a myth. And I hope you learn a lot, and I'll see you next time. Bye.